Hi and welcome back to Golf FM. This is a review and a look at Ping's 2023 range of irons. Going to look at all the models apart from the iBlade because that's just a little bit too hard to hit for most people. But the main range of irons, so that includes the G430, the I525, the I230 and the I59. I've tested all of these irons before and you may have seen some of my reviews, I don't know. They're all good, they're all nice, but I just want to go through them again and kind of organize them in my mind as to who they're for, what they feel like, what the performance is like between them, the differences, because sometimes there's very small differences between irons. Sometimes there's just a very slight difference and you're unsure as to what model you should actually go for. And this video is just intended to sort of make that choice, that purchasing choice a little bit easier. Of course you should go and get fitted and that will probably finalize which is best for you, but if you're one of these people that maybe doesn't do that and buys online and that sort of thing, or tends to chop and change a little bit or wants to do it themselves, then this is a good guide to tell you the slight differences between the irons and point you in the right direction. The first one I'm going to hit is the G430. Now I've actually, I'll let you in on a secret, I've actually hit all my shots earlier on, right? And I compiled the data and I decided to boil it down to one good shot with each and see what the data was like with that. I think it's too difficult to determine how they perform on off-center hits because there's no two off-center hits are really the same. So it's very difficult to actually compare how forgiving a club is. It's possible to get an idea that one's slightly more forgiving than the other, but to quantify that's very difficult. So what I've done is I waited until I hit one good shot with each, and I won't tell you how long that took, but it's been achieved and they're all very similar shots. So I know when I hit this shot that it was very, very similar to the other shots that I hit. So it was a good strike out of the middle with a very slight, almost imperceptible draw on it. And that's my sort of favourite iron shot that I hit. And so I waited until I got one of each from that and we had a look at the data. So the data I'm going to present is based on a good shot. So I'll hit a couple of these each just now to remind myself of what the difference is in the feel and go through a little bit about the looks and that sort of thing as well. Okay, so when you put the G430 down, there's a little bit of offset. It's a very thin top line, it's a reasonably big head, but the important thing is the top line's quite thin, and I think this is quite a key point because I think this means that it can be used by quite a lot of players. And when I've been hitting this, the main thing I've noticed is actually that the offset doesn't really do very much. I don't know if Ping want to claim that it does, but it doesn't make me hook the ball all the time, which is my bad shot would be left. So offset should make me hook it. Don't really feel I'm having to try to guard against that with this. It feels fairly neutral. So somebody that's slicing the ball badly, you might almost need to think about something that's got even more offset and even more bias towards not hitting a slice. But for an everyday golfer, from quite a lowish handicap potentially, right up to quite a high handicap, the G430 could fit in terms of the way it's built. So I'll hit them, and mainly to remind myself again of the feel and the sound. That was a good strike, not maybe fully warmed up yet, so I think it could go a little bit further than that, but it was a decent strike. And this is a fairly soft ball, it's a staff model Wilson ball that I use. That felt nice. I mean, a golf ball hit out the middle, as I've said before in some other videos, a golf club hit out the middle, sorry I should say, does feel good generally. It's a nice feeling that. When you hit it off centre, it doesn't feel so good, and sometimes when it's a cast club it really doesn't feel very good. And also that can happen on blades as well. It can be a horrible feeling when you don't hit a blade out the middle. This feels like a cast club. I'm not going to say that it feels ultra soft, even though there's vibration dampening in there, there's all sorts of things to try and make it feel soft. It doesn't feel like a forged face, but it is a perfectly acceptable feel and sound of it. It's a little bit higher pitched than some of the forged faces that you'll hit, but then it's not trying to be forged. Before I go much further, I should also mention the lofts. Now this is coming in at 29 degrees. The I525 is coming in at 30.5. The I230 is coming in at 33 degrees and the I59 is coming in at 34 degrees. This goes further principally because the loft is the least. But there are design features in here with low weighting to make it go higher and give you that spin and stop that you would want. Like for like, they're never going to go the same distances. The two that go the closest is the next one I'm going to hit, which is the I525. That is only 1.5 degrees more lofted, and it has a hollow body and a forged face. It tries pretty hard to keep up with this G430, but the G430 still is the longest out of the Ping clubs that I've hit. And before I hit the I525, I also want to just talk about price. I've mentioned that the lofts are different, the prices are different. The G430 is coming in about $979 for a set of 7 irons. The I525 is coming in about $1169 for the same iron set, 7 irons. That's the same for the I230, exactly the same as I525, $1169 for 7 irons. And the I59, which I'll hit at the end. Very hefty price tag on this one of $1469 for the same amount of irons, 7 irons. But I'll get to that in a minute. There's a bit of a difference between I525 and I230 and G430, and that is all in the face. That's mainly because it's a forged face in here. More expensive material, but it does give you a bit of a softer feel, as I'm about to remind myself. Looking at it, it straight away looks more pleasing to me. As a slightly lower handicap, better player, this looks like something you would want to hit. There's very little offset on that. It's a very thin top line. The head doesn't look as big, even though it is still quite big. It's a nice looking club, really nice looking club. You wouldn't believe that this is as forgiving as it actually is, and as powerful as it actually is when you put it down. You would think that it looks a very unforgiving blade-like club, and it isn't. Quite the opposite. It's not like a million miles away from what the G430 feels like, but there is definitely something in there that feels a little bit softer when you hit it. You can feel the forged face, or hear it, whatever you want to talk about feel, because a lot of people think it's just the sound. It's a lovely looking thing, very forgiving and very strong in terms of the distance that it goes. So yeah, on the comparison figures between the G430 and the I525, you had 2 mile an hour. This is on this shot that felt the same to me, you know, felt the same strike. The ball speed was faster off the G430 by 2 miles an hour. The launch was a little bit, fraction higher, believe it or not, so we'll have to discount that slightly, because that could have been me slightly de-lofting it, because there's less loft on the G430, and so by rights it should launch lower, although there are weights in it which are trying to bring it up, so it could be about right that the launch is pretty similar on the G430 and the I525. Spin rate, very similar, very similar, 30 RPM different, slightly more spin on the I525. So those figures are quite similar. And then the carry distance was 170 on the I525 and 173 on the G430, and I think again that'll just be the loft difference making that up. There wasn't a lot of difference between them, but you could see that the G430 is maybe just a little bit more powerful, probably not that noticeable at all in general play. And what you will notice in general play is a different look to the I525 and a different feel to the I525. So if you want a little bit of a better player look, you need to go I525, and if you don't want offset, you need to go I525. If you're more bothered about the performance, you probably go G430, because if you're not that bothered about the offset, then the performance is slightly better on the G4. It's slightly more forgiving, it's slightly more powerful. And again, that's not taking into account things like the sole width as well, which is slightly wider on the G430 and therefore better for stopping you hitting fat shots. It won't dig into the turf quite as much as the I525 will. Even though that's not particularly narrow sole, it still is slightly more narrow than the G430. So I'll go and hit the I230 now. Just a little note, I'm hitting these all with exactly the same shaft, which is the Dynamic Gold 105 S300. which is the shaft I use in my own Wilson D9 forged irons. I230 looks, I'm not sure if somebody swapped them about that I would notice that I'd gone from I525 to I230. So that's the biggest compliment I can give to the I525, is there's virtually no difference looking at it to the I230. Ping will probably tell me there is, but again, basically I've got a club with very thin top line, minimal offset, and a nice looking head. Looks really good. This is 33 degrees loft, so it's 2.5 degrees weaker than the I525. See what it feels like. It does feel really good. It feels very little difference between the I525 and this. Now, that's not a forged face, it's just a softer cast metal all the way over, I believe. So don't quite know how they're doing that. Probably things in behind, vibration dampening, that sort of thing. But overall, in a blind test, I would be struggling to tell the difference between I230 and I525 in terms of feel. They both feel a bit softer than the G430. So purchase decision wise, what's the difference? The I230 is coming out 2 miles an hour slower ball speed on that good strike that I did, like for like strike. It's launching a lot higher, 2 degrees higher roughly than the I525. There's a significant amount more spin. It's 5,500 as opposed to 4,900. And carry's gone 164 on the I230. And it was 170 on the I525. I don't know that we should be comparing this to G430. I think if you're starting to think about I230, you shouldn't really be worrying about, oh, should I choose between I230 and G430? You're way off with what you think you're capable of there, because this is not anywhere near as forgiving as G430. It's got a slightly narrower sole again. The heads are smaller as you go up the set comparatively, so they're less forgiving. And there's not a huge cavity in here, so it's not a lot of perimeter weighting. This club gets used by a lot of tour pros, and one of the reasons that it gets used by tour pros rather than I525 is I525's hollow, and a lot of tour pros get a bit funny about hollow clubs because they're worried that they're going to get a flyer every now and again. Now, I've talked about this at length. For the average person, it's not an issue, I don't think. I mean, some people tell me it is, but sometimes I think they're looking for excuses of why they've hit over the green and wanting to blame the club and not themselves and that sort of thing. So I actually think that the times, I mean, I've been using a hollow bodied iron for a long time now, and I think I can remember one instance where I was a wee bit concerned as to why suddenly a shot which I felt like I hit the same went over a green rather than the previous shot I hit with it went about the distance I was expecting. So one shot out of all the shots I've hit. Now, you could miss the shot more often just through a missed strike than worrying about suddenly it ballooning off the face and carrying too far or whatever. Like, I don't think it's something you have to worry about as an average person. So, but if you are a better player that really wants the security that you are never ever going to get any inconsistency with speed off the face, then I230 and the way that it's built will enable you to sleep at night. That's one consideration. This club really, I think if you're putting it up against I525, it's a slightly more difficult question, because that reason I've just talked about, that inconsistency and potential consistency that I230 might give you, that's to me the only reason you would pick I230 over I525. The other reason might be vanity, and that it's seen as being a better player's club and that tour players use it, and no tour players use the I525. So a set of these sitting in your bag says something about you maybe, as opposed to I525. So that, and believe it or not, can be quite a strong reason for some people. You know, it's why in tennis I used to buy a Roger Federer spec racket because I wanted to feel like I was using the same one as Roger Federer, even though I wasn't even remotely close to hitting any of the shots the same as he hit them, and it was heavier and unforgiving. I just liked the look of it and I wanted to use it. It's a bit like that with golf clubs. Blades. Some of the reason why people buy blades, a set of blades, is simply because they think they're nice things to look at and they want to use a nice looking golf club, and they will use it in spite of the fact that there are more forgiving clubs out there. So I230, good all-round club, does offer a good degree of forgiveness for better players, but if you're going light for light and you're not playing for your living, or you're not trying to win the British Amateur, then then I525 potentially is a better option than I230. And finally onto I59, which is a strange club. It's probably more forgiving than the I230. I don't know whether Ping would think that, but when you look at the way it's built and what's inside it, an aluminium core to give soft feel and tungsten weights and things like that, there's stuff going on in here that the I230 doesn't have. In a way it should be more forgiving, and yet this is the bridge between I230 and the I blade. So it's a smaller head, it's probably a thinner sole again. I'm going to tell you where I think the top line is thinner in a minute. And it's very expensive. I mean, this is £300 more expensive than a 7-iron set of I230s or I525s. And it's less forgiving than the I525. Not a lot in it with the I230. And no, I think I read that there's one tour play that uses these. Can't remember his name now. Because it's officially hollow, that puts them off, and they get scared off with the inconsistency idea, unable to sleep at night again. I do like the look of it, and I'm going to hit it and remind myself what it feels like. So as I just said, I do like the look of it. It looks a little bit different to the I230 and the I525, and I think partly because it looks more lofted. This is a 7-iron, it's 34 degrees, it's 33 in the I230 and it was 30.5 in the I525. So it suddenly looks like it's got more loft on it, and it's a slightly more compact head. You've got a little white line at the bottom. It's nice, there's very little offset. It's a nice looking club, and at the back I think it looks the best out of the lot, to be honest. Really, really nice, but very expensive. So let's see how it feels. It does feel good. It's got a nice something about it. It's got a nice feel about it. Not when you hit it like that, it doesn't. Spoke too soon. That was horrific. That was a horror show. So this is a weird one because it doesn't have a forged face, but it's got the aluminium in the back, which is supposed to give it a soft feel. It does feel quite soft, and I don't know whether I'm just imagining it and I want it to feel different because it's more expensive and I know it's a little bit different. That it does feel soft and it does feel good and solid in a slightly different way to what the I525 and the I230 feel. It's probably, if I did a blind test, I might be struggling, but there's something about it, and it's almost a bit like, you know, when you know it's good and you know it's different, you almost tell yourself it is. So it's like a bottle of wine. When somebody tells you, well, it's a 20 quid bottle of wine, that's a nice one, that. And you put it up against the £5 one, you're thinking immediately, want the £20 one to taste. So you know you're going to tell yourself it tastes nicer. And it's a bit like that with this. So your sort of perception is, because it's more expensive, it's going to feel nice, it's going to be better. I do sort of find myself almost wanting to like this and wanting to, you know, almost be able to justify that, well, if I got a set of Pings again, maybe this is the one I would go for. And there is a case for it if you're a better player and you want something that looks really good and really bladey, because there is quite a lot of technology in this. So it is trying to help you, even though it's not as forgiving as some of the bigger headed clubs. Because of the lofts as well, it doesn't go as far. So you would have to get tournament lofts if you wanted it to catch up with any of these other clubs. So if you go from a strong set of players irons like a P790 or something like that, or even a P770, this is not going to hit it as far because it's 34 degrees loft. You'd have to do something to the lofts to get it to compete. On that basis, I wouldn't buy a standard set of these because I would just feel like I was having to hit at least one club extra every time, if not more than that. And that would do my head in after a while, even despite how nice they look and how nice they feel and how exclusive they are. It wouldn't last forever that you would start to wish that you were just hitting one less club every time. So I actually had 115 mph ball speed, which was 1 mph faster than the I230. So that might be something to do with the technology in it. 19.3 lofts, it was the lowest. It was a slightly lower launch than the I230 shot. I thought I hit them very similar. That's such a small difference that actually could have just purely been the strike. And 6,251 spin, so there was quite a lot more spin on it. And again, the loft will have a lot to do with that extra degree. So it was 700 RPM more spin than the equivalent shot I hit with the I525. 162 yards on the shot hit, and it was 164 yards on the shot hit with the I230. So not a lot of difference. I think that was a particularly good one, and I think overall the I230 would probably beat it in terms of forgiveness. The I230 would, I think, beat it in terms of distance each time, simply because you've got that 1 degree loft advantage. But in terms of forgiveness, I don't think there'd be much in it actually between the I230 and the I59. So I mean, if you could get these tournament lofted down to what the I230 is, then it becomes a slightly more difficult question as to what should I get. Now the price, some people, it won't bother them that this is £300 more. In fact, they'll like it that not many people will have it. If you discount that, then the battle between the I230 and this is based on looks, and I think the I59 would win that battle, because it is slightly, in my opinion, for a better player, a better looking club. It's one of the nicest pings I've ever seen, to be honest. So let's recap. G430, longest, most forgiving, but does have offset and doesn't have the best of feel. So if you don't think you need offset, or you really don't think you need offset, because remember it doesn't do that much, the offset on this, then you need to move up to one of the clubs that doesn't have any offset, because you're not going to like the look of this. But if you don't mind a little bit of offset, then this is the club for you, basically, because it's the longest and it's the most forgiving. It's also the cheapest. I525, you get no offset, and you get slightly thinner top line marginally. The main thing is no offset, and then the other main factor is you've got a forged face, so you're getting a softer feel over the G430. It is a little bit of a jump in price, but it's not ridiculous. And this, for me, if I had to pick one ping out of the range, this would be my pick of the range. But that doesn't go for all golfers, because if you're needing all the help you can get and you need a little bit of offset and you need a wider sole, then the G430 is the club. But I really like the I525. I think it's great because it looks great and it goes really far and it is forgiving. I230, players club, tour pros use it. That means a lot. You can use this if you are not a tour pro and you're a fairly low handicapper. I wouldn't say you even need to be scratch or 1 or 2 or anything. You can be a bit higher than that and this will still work for you. You're just giving up a little bit of forgiveness, and you're definitely giving up a bit of distance over the I525, and you're not really sacrificing looks with the I525. So I230, same price as I525. If you're worried about playing the British Amateur and making a living out of golf, then you'll be able to have a good night's sleep, because you'll know that you're never, literally never ever going to get a flyer because of the club. You might get a flyer for another reason, remember that, and the other reasons you can get flyers, but a nice workman's tool, you know, does not flashy, not all singing all dancing, just go out and play golf with it if you're a decent player and it'll do what it says on the tin. Finally, I59, slightly strange one in that it's £300 dearer than the one I was just talking about. Does look slightly different, in some eyes that'll look nicer than I230 or even I525, and has quite a lot of technology packed into it to give it a little bit of forgiveness. The loft is weak, so it's not going to go as far, so you're just going to have to accept that or do something about it when you buy them, but shouldn't be discounted because it is a little bit different, and this would be this is almost the connoisseur's choice. You know, you kind of have to know your onions to get this one, and you have to be a decent player as well, because it is a smaller club head and they're literally, it's a thinner sole, so it isn't as forgiving. But you could still use this and not be scratch. You know, you could be a fairly good player, 5 or 6 handicap, and probably still get away with using these. So hopefully that gives you a good insight into the 2023 ping iron range. Tried to keep it fairly simple, tried to keep it short, although it's probably still massively long, and I've got so much editing to do to get it down to a reasonable level that somebody might actually watch it. But if you have got any questions, put them in the comments and I'll get back to you. And I'd just like to say thanks again for watching. Much appreciated.